Hello, and welcome to Russia Decoded. My name is Andy Kuchins. I'm a senior fellow at the Center for the National Interest in Washington, D.C., and a professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. This podcast is sponsored by the Center for the National Interest in D.C. What we do here is we explain what is going on in Russia and Russia's narrative about the world using kind of the platform of what the Russians are broadcasting in their national news. Many might call it propaganda, but most national news programs are propaganda. Nevertheless, though, with experienced eyes and ears, one can glean quite a bit from this. My co-host, Chris Monday, and myself, we're just two dudes from California. Chris is from LA. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. We don't talk about the LA Tokyo Dodgers. But the point is that we don't really have an agenda here. We are nonpartisan. I think our takes are original. And let me just take this opportunity to introduce Chris, who is in Busan, South Korea, where he is a professor of economics at Dongseo University. How you doing, Chris?
Great. So great to be here. So many topics to discuss today. Looking forward to it.
I want to start this week by taking off on a really insightful point that you made last week, Chris, that I think deserves elaboration. It's not often that we really editorialize, but we're going to editorialize a little bit here in the intro. We were discussing the weekly accent that Russian news makes on the increasing coalescence on Russian and Trump administration disparaging views of Europe in the context of the ongoing peace negotiations or the Russo-Ukrainian war. That it is the Europeans, from the Russian standpoint, that are encouraging Ukraine to fight. And in fact, Europe is making increasingly bellicose remarks regarding the threat of war with Russia. And the U.S. national security strategy that was released about 10 days ago is so critical of Europe. Mr. Putin must be quite happy about that. And he must be rather happy that NATO appears rather shaky right now. And Chris's comment was, beware of what you wish for, Putin. Beware of what you wish for. Meaning that the breakup of NATO, seemingly a goal of Russia, as it was during the Soviet period, would actually be very destabilizing for European security, including Russia, Ukraine, and Europe. And really, if you think longer about it, probably not in Russia's interests. The Europeans would dramatically increase defense budgets. They would create a more unified European defense structure. You would likely also see some proliferation of nuclear weapons capable states, starting with Poland and Germany. EU GDP is about 10x that of Russia right now, and the capacity for innovation and high tech is orders of magnitude greater in Europe. And also, if Europe were untethered from NATO, then you would likely have 8 or 9 or maybe more states in Europe who are violently opposed to Russia. And they would not be under the constrictions of consensus decision-making, which, contrary to the view of Mr. Putin in Russia, actually does exist in NATO. None of those things would really be good for Russia. Sanctions have been exceedingly damaging to the Russian economy long-term, especially on technology. They are nowhere on artificial intelligence. There was a wonderful Wall Street Journal story this past week where they have a video of a demonstration of Russia's first humanoid robot about a month ago in Moscow, apparently, and where the robot took a couple of stumbling steps and literally fell on its face. I mean, it was just such a great metaphor, actually, for, how Russian technological capacity is being really seriously damaged for the long term by the isolating effect of the sanctions. It's not really clear, as we've talked about in our last few episodes, it's not really clear where Putin really is on these negotiations. But I also want to say something about the debate on security guarantees, which is one of the significant stumbling blocks, I think, in the negotiations now. I would point to three of them. One being the question of security guarantees for Europe after a ceasefire and hopefully after the war is concluded. Probably the biggest one actually is in territorial concessions, the territorial exchange. And then I think a third one also has to do with the Russian central bank reserves that have been frozen by the EU. They're trying to decide about how to use those to help Ukraine to address its major budget deficits coming up. But security guarantees to me are really kind of massively overrated. And I want to actually read to you, to our listeners, Article 5 of the NATO treaty that was signed in 1949, and I think you will see what I mean. This is, quote, the parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all, and consequently they agree that, if such an armed attack occurs, each of them, in exercise of the right of individual or collective self-defense, recognized by Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations, will assist the party or parties so attacked by taking forthwith, individually and in concert with other parties, boy, this is really lawyerese, isn't it? Such action as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force, to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area. That's the key paragraph, but I'll just read the second shorter paragraph so that you have it all. Any such armed attack and all measures taken as a result thereof shall immediately be reported to the Security Council of the United Nations. Such measures shall be terminated when the Security Council has taken the measures necessary to restore and maintain international peace and security. That's it. That's Article 5. There were a lot of lawyers involved in writing this, but what this is really saying, if you boil it down, is that each NATO member will decide how to respond to an attack on another NATO member. There are no specific operational demands. It has never been really tested in 76 years, thank God, although it was invoked after 9/11 in 2001, really in a more symbolic gesture of support to the United States that had just been attacked. But Ukraine is not going to get any better security guarantees than this. Frankly, I think that 99% of the talking heads who talk like Article 5 is some kind of sacred commitment, ironclad commitment, had never actually read it. The U.S. Senate would never have approved the NATO treaty if there had been firmer security commitments. What NATO really depends on is the American strategic nuclear deterrent, for one thing. But secondly, it depends upon, what countries decide to do in their national interest. And right now, actually, the United States and Europe have been supporting Ukraine to a great degree, not because Ukraine is a NATO member, but because they see it in their national interests. And if there's some kind of agreement now and 3 years down the road, I think it would be the same thing in that the United States and European states would make a decision about how they support Ukraine if Russia were to come in again on the basis of their national interest, and not because of what this piece of paper is. At any rate, that's my soapbox for today. Chris, do you want to add add to this since it was actually your point in the first place?
I agree with you on the guarantees. In fact, there's documents that during the Cold War, there were many U.S. officials that said, after they left office, these U.S. officials, I believe Kissinger said, yeah, we would not defend Europe if there was actually a threat of a nuclear war. We would not follow Article 5. John Mearsheimer actually has several good document-based articles on this issue. We see today there's a little bit of hypocrisy in many ways. These European leaders, in some ways, they want the Ukrainian conflict to go on, to keep the United States in. That's their main goal, is keep them in Europe. They know there has to be some kind of issue like this to keep the U.S. involved in the continent. And of course, we see a blame game. Things from the Western perspective aren't going well in Russia-Ukrainian war, and of course, America, we want to blame Europe, and Europe wants to blame Trump, and and I think that's this guarantees issue is kind of wrapped up in that. I guess, people will criticize this, but I think Witkoff and Team Trump, they actually have a good perspective that the key is to get Russia and Ukraine to look at their own self-interests, business interests. The main guarantee is to get Russia to realize it's not in their interest to conquer more territory. I'd say conquer any territory is not in their interest. This has been a blowout for the Russian economy. Get Russia to see reason and realize that it's just not in their self-interest to do this. In terms of Trump on TV, I think there's also a point to be made on Russian TV. That's one reason why we watch Russian media. It seems to me, and I could be wrong here, that Trump, he's very popular with everyday Russians. And so there's a little bit of schizophrenia we see on the TV. They can't criticize Trump too much. They can't push this because everyday Russians, they look Trump and they like this idea. They want peace. And so the Russian media, it's constrained here. They can't go on a full on attack on Trump. In conclusion, I'd like to warn if there's any Team Trump members listening to our podcast, I would like to warn them it's very important. Putin and in general the Russian leaders, they have a personal code of conduct. And if you violate that code, you get in trouble. Putin, he has a manly code that if you leak something confidential, if you cross an oral agreement, a written agreement, if you violate that, he can understand it. But a man-to-man agreement, you can't cross. Leaders who do that, they'll face a very vicious PR attack at the least. I think we saw this kind of mistake with the second George Bush and with Obama and with Biden. Putin was just angry with them personally. He thought they violated a code, and we could see that with Trump if Putin sees that he's not sticking to these behind the scenes agreements.
What I like to say about the Kremlin is like Vegas. What happens in the Kremlin stays in the Kremlin. And I think that is kind of what you're saying, as I understand it, Chris, about, what Putin says in confidence to other people that are not broadcast on TV, but that are any agreement that he would make in person. Anyway, we'll see what happens. Let's get back to Vyesti Nedeli, News of the Week, the 2-hour broadcast on Sunday evenings. And the show leads this week with Skazal Izdel Mushina. What's that all about, Chris?
So there you go again. It's so important, the Putin code, his personal code, that you give your word and you follow your word. And so Putin, he's very proud of this. This is, I believe, 2023. Putin, he visited Dagestan. This is in the height of the war when things weren't going well. He went to this tumultuous region and
The North Caucasus.
yes, and they're the ones doing the fighting. It's brutal. But anyway, he supposedly he went to this region. They showed on TV, and of course, the masses they loved him. And Putin recounted, a woman came up to him and said, "Молодец, wonderful."
An
He said,
attractive woman, he
"Man,
noted.
you did it. You're a real man, Sheena." This is Putin was very proud of himself. A lot of these newscasts, they're just to pump up Putin's ego. In Vesti Nedeli, we see the war. We see they say that the tempo is increasing. They're taking more towns, what they call towns, although they're little, and for Americans, they wouldn't really be towns. They're just small little hamlets, villages. Seversk, they captured this town. Another victory. They show the flag go up. And then they say we're going to continue now to Krematorsk. And the vibe, it's very much like a World War. They're trying to imitate these World War II reports of this, victory after victory. So in this report, it's very important to see this continuing buildup of a Putin personality cult. Putin, after these reports, we see him meet with the commanders. Putin, of course, is in charge. He's in his office, and we see the commanders on the video. He's talking to them, and we see Putin. He's a master of all the details. He knows everything about the war, every little detail, what they're doing. We see on the news. It's very important. We see these maps, the maps of the war. It's very important that we see in the West. We portray the Russians as just kind of, the orcs, right? They're just the human waves. They're just throwing the bodies into the fight, and then some of that's true. But the Russian perspective, it's the opposite. They show that this master strategy. They're using they call it the ketla, the kettle strategy of surrounding the Ukrainian troops with the map. And we see Putin. He's literally kind of like standing above the map. This is an archetype of the Russian leader who stands above the battle, that is directing it, and he's cleverly surrounding the Ukrainian towns, the Ukrainian troops. He's got them surrounded.
Chris, sorry if I could
Yes.
just jump in there. You mentioned the maps. One thing I was surprised this week was they're pointing out that Zelensky went to Kupiansk. Now,
Yes.
Kupiansk, which 3 weeks ago, the Russian news was celebrating Kupiansk Nash. Kupiansk is ours. And it was this big victory. But I was surprised they showed Zelensky going there because Zelensky went there after there was an effective Ukrainian counteroffensive. Now, the Russian news didn't mention that, but just showing
Yeah.
the fact that Zelensky was in Kupiansk was kind of surprising to me. The really striking thing to me about the Russian offensive, Chris, is just how slow the progress is. Now, in about a month, second half of January, I don't know exactly which day, the Russians will have been at war with Ukraine longer than the Soviet Union fought Nazi Germany. And of course, in World War II, the Red Army not only recovered, a big swath of Soviet European territory, but also they went through Eastern Europe and all the way to Berlin. They acquired a lot of territory. In fact, it was the furthest west that the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, ever got. In this case, when the Russians started the all-out war in February of 22, almost 4 years ago, by the summertime, they had approximately 19-20% of Ukrainian territory. Now, in the 3.5 years since, they've only increased that amount of territory that they hold by one, maybe, but certainly less than 2% of Ukrainian territory. It's just not that much. By comparison with World War II, it really is kind of pathetic, I would say. And, Putin to be the modern day regatherer of the Russian lands. Yet they
Yeah.
always show on the news these distorted maps that, Chris,
They
that
show it a
suggest
small
that
perspective.
suggest Russia is
Perspective.
making
Yes.
huge territorial gains, which is absolute nonsense. They never show a key, indicating, that, okay, 1 centimeter on the map equals 100 kilometers, for example. When, when in reality, I think it's like 1 centimeter, 1 centimeter on the map actually means 3 centimeters in reality. Now I'm overstating it there, but you get the point, right?
It's an illusion. When you watch the Russian news, they're masters of deception and illusion, and it's the scale. But I'd say watching the Russian, it's very effective. Seeing these maps and this idea of controlling the land, the Zion, the master of the land, and we see again turning back to Putin in this report, we see this new cult where Putin he's shown much bigger, physically bigger on screen than the others. He's dominating them. He's this huge man. Increasingly, Putin, he has no friends, he has no comrades, he's no wife anymore. There's no peers like before, like Shoigu. He's becoming like a Stalin-like cult. In some ways, it looks more like a pharaoh or something. This ties into the semiotics of Russian power, who the Russian leader should be.
They really are channeling kind of Stalin is the father of the people. Putin is the father of the people. He presides over these events like, Day of the Invalids, Den Invalidov, or, Day of Volunteers, and meeting with these various groups who are all contributing in their own ways to this larger fight.
It's a dangerous tendency. There are military figures, a commander, but we don't know who they are. There's no cult of any military figure. Even Gerasimov,
Well,
most
not
they
after
don't
not
really
after
know.
Prigozhin, right?
They don't know who he is. Yeah, the only Russian military leaders that Russians know are Igor Girkin, who's in prison, Prigozhin, who was killed,
Right.
and then is Surovikin, who is now, we don't really know. He's in Africa somewhere. These people, we see them once and then they're just gone. They're just gone. It's just Putin doing the war. He's an all-seeing ruler, and it's also important when he talks to these men. They say, he can see my heart. He can see directly in me what I'm feeling. It's the Stalin-like cult. We saw this during Stalin, during World War
So
II.
it seemed like this week was felt like a little bit of a slow news week as they did a lengthy piece about the great new uniforms Russians are producing for their soldiers, including also lovely dinner utensils. There was an exhibition in Moscow and a very high level Duma delegation attending it, led by the Speaker of the Duma, Vyacheslav Volodin, and also the leader of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, the venerable relic Gennady Zyuganov, who's been around for 35 years as the leader of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. What is your takeaway? Because they
This
devoted
again is
quite a bit of time to this exhibition.
they're constantly rewriting history. By the way, we should mention it's the anniversary of this Decemberist revolt. The Decembrists during Nicholas
That's right.
II, during
It's the
Nicholas
bicentenary,
Yes, yeah. They
1825.
revolted, and during Soviet times, these were regarded as heroes. We're now, we're seeing in the history books, these are, buntovshik. They're, rebels, horrible rebels, and hated God and things.
Well, I
It's
mean,
rewriting
the
history.
Decembrist so-called revolution was really the first socially mobilized
Yep.
opposition to,
Yes.
well,
These were
that
millet.
wouldn't necessarily be true if you count the peasant rebellions of Pugachev and others, but this was sort of more at the elite level,
These are men who fought Napoleon in the French Revolutionary War, who then, they saw what France was like, they saw the situation, and
all
they
through
turned
Europe. They saw,
war. Yeah.
and they were
So
infected by the European spirit.
So here with the military clothing, it's the same situation where they're rewriting history. Of course, 2022, they had the soldiers. They showed this on the news. It's incredible. You're going to the front, and you had to buy your own winter clothes, and you had to buy your own weapons, and they weren't properly equipped. They're just thrown into the fighting, and of course, many died, and so now they're rewriting it. Of course, Rostech, the Chemisiv, they're wonderfully preparing the troops, and they have these advanced uniforms. So I'd say it would be important, if you're a military expert, to watch this one. There's claiming that these uniforms protect against the infrared, the drones, and that they're flame retardant. So, I guess, the Ukrainians, they have these drones that shoot flames, like a dragon. Perhaps it's, something against that. I'm sure these super uniforms are probably going to the children of the elite that go to the front and not to the common soldiers is my bet.
So,
But
so following on the slow Newsweek theme, perhaps they resurrect the national projects, focusing on demographic stimulus policies, and a lengthy segment focused on "Успех это дети." Your children are your success. Could you give me your take on that one, Chris?
Oh, this is so important for to understanding Russia. Actually, I wrote a paper on this. If I can promote myself, family rule is the highest stage of communism. That was in 2011, and
That's a good
I
one.
still stand by it. My thesis was that the family has replaced the Communist Party as the leading ideology, and Putin, in a way, he's kind of the phallus of the Russian Federation, like a fertility. It's kind of like a pagan fertility thing. And here we see again where this strange report where we see, these families, you shouldn't just have three children, you should have eight children. They're professionals, professors, something. They're mainly Slavic people. and they're supposed to have the so-called traditional Russian family, with the many, many children.
Although
We
they
do
did
see
have the
one,
one Yakut family from Yakutia,
yes, we do see
the
one
Arctic Circle.
Yakut. That's very important. They threw that in, but of course, there's no Muslim family. They're mainly Slavic peoples. But this is, the traditional Russian family that's going to provide the bulk work for Russia. And they don't say this, but of course, Russia, they're worried about the demographic situation after the war. A lot of it's very hard to get good facts about what's going on demographically, but we're sure that the Russian demographics were bad, and now they're going to be worse. In some ways, this is a sop to the conservatives in America, like a Vance or G.D. Vance or Musk, who talk about this thing. But if we look a little bit deeper, if I could plug my paper, this is my first paper, my favorite paper. I wrote in 1999 in Russian, Le Play Versi. So Frederick Le Play, he's the founder of sociology. He's a huge intellectual figure, and he worked in Russia, and he wrote. It's just a masterpiece, probably the best book ever on Russia. It's a 6 volume work. Les ouvriers européens, the European workers,
So
and
he's a French guy,
she's a French
French
mining
scholar.
engineer. He's a genius, one of the great geniuses ever. And he argued that the family is what divides different peoples. There's European peoples, and there's, the Occident, the Eastern peoples, and it's the famille souche, this rooted family that is the basis of this civilization, this Eastern civilization. And he was the first to really open up this kind of family state. The Russian peasant family was a kind of state unto itself. They had their own kind of economy. And this became central to Russian ideology. Of course, conservative. He was a founder of modern conservatism. This is a lot where it comes from. Central to understanding, decoding Russia is of course the peasant family, the family structure.
Absolutely. So the next topic was Putin did travel last week. He went to Ashgabat, the capital of Turkmenistan. And from what Vesti Nedeli reported, it kind of looked like a boondoggle, sort of a strange meeting. But Turkmenistan, Chris, is a strange place. I traveled there 4 times in 2014, 2015. My main takeaway was it seemed what I would imagine North Korea to be, but with gas and more
Yep.
sunshine.
Yep.
So this past week, it was an international forum on peace and trust. That's a very fluffy title. It was quite an unusual grouping of countries, including Central Asia, the Middle East, including Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Pakistan, as well as some from Africa. I think sometimes the meetings like this are mainly an opportunity for the leaders of the states to have bilateral leader meetings. That's always an opportunity that they offer. And featured on the news earlier in the week were, in particular, Erdogan, a leader of Turkey, and the Central Asians and Putin. Perhaps this was an opportunity to work on Caspian Sea policy. I don't know. But the discussions on the news with the Turkmen president, Serdar Berdimuhamedov, and later with his father, the former longtime president, Gurganbuli Berdimuhamedov. Yeah, that's a mouthful, huh? My main takeaway, Chris, from those two meetings with Putin and those guys was they don't really speak that good of Russian. Not nearly as good of Russian as, for example, Sadir Japarov, the president of Kyrgyzstan, or Mr. Tokayev, the president of Kazakhstan. But maybe this was just an opportunity for Vesti Nedeli to feature a Eurasian family dynasty. And speaking of dynasties, conspicuous in his absence at this eclectic gathering was the Azeri leader Ilham Aliyev. Not quite sure
Mhm.
what to make of that. What was your take on this segment, Chris?
Behind the scenes, of course, there's a lot of geopolitical machinations that they don't talk about. But of course, for Turkey's rising in the area, and Russia's, I think, slowly being pushed out. But on the news, I would say we're seeing increasingly this Russian, what Edward Said called Orientalism,
Yeah.
This, it's just a demeaning picture of Central Asia, and we saw this in Kyrgyzia, Turkmenistan. It's this kind of for
India,
us
India even.
picture of these, the people dancing in traditional clothes. It's like a timeless, what Edward Said said, this timeless Eastern area, exotic area, and they don't really have, any real history or motives or strategy, and so it's a place, where Putin can go in and make some deals. I find that very insulting for Central Asians, these depictions. And then, of course, as you said, Turkmenistan, it's basically a North Korea. It's a very repressive area, and of course, there's many ethnic Russians that live there, and we never hear. Of course,
Not
they're
too
very
many.
upset about
Most of
Ukraine.
them left.
Yeah, I met many in Russia. We never hear about them at all. You never hear any criticism ever of Turkmenistan, ever. Just a fine place. Ukraine is, full of Nazis and the oppression and forced to speak Ukrainian in Ukraine. Imagine that. There is just a lot of hypocrisy.
Hypocrisy on the Russian news? Oh, you
Yeah.
must be kidding. So there was a I think this is quite an interesting story about the report that Ukraine is building a dirty bomb. Now, this is not the first time we've heard about Ukraine building a dirty bomb, but it seemed to really kind of come out of nowhere in this news broadcast. It kind of makes you wonder what is up with that.
This should be taken very seriously. So this is made by the This is a report made by the Russian military intelligence.
The GRU.
Before this started in about 2013, they would make these reports, these accusations that the United States was building covert biological weapon labs in Ukraine. And these were actually the first times, especially in the written reports, the first times you start hearing that, we need to attack Ukraine. These are the first place where we heard that this need to attack Ukraine. So I mean, it was great. It was dismissed at the time. These crazy things, about making this genetic weapon or just kind of crazy stuff. But behind it, it was very serious. If you've been reading these reports carefully, you would see Russia was serious at the time. This is already 2013 about attacking Ukraine, supposedly getting rid of this danger, the biolabs. So these reports, these have to be taken seriously. They're usually a sign that the Russian military is planning something. So here we see, it's outrageous. Of course, Yermak, who's been disgraced in the Russian eyes, it turns
Well,
out they have documents.
again, Andre Yermak was the former right hand and left hand to Mr. Zelensky, and he was forced to resign a couple
Yes,
of
yeah,
couple of weeks ago in response to this corruption scandal.
yes. Yeah, so now they supposedly have documents that show he's a nuclear genius. He's was planning to make a nuclear weapon. Of course, it's absurdity, but I would take this very seriously. I think that it's hinting that Putin, he could, if they see foreign troops in Ukraine, they could turn to, drastic measures. They have, of course, there's a history of Russia using chemical weapons, and I wouldn't even count out some kind of tactical nuclear weapon, some kind of
Yeah,
provocation. It was
it's
Yermak
pretty
did.
it's pretty nefarious. We're coming to the
If I
close
could,
of
if I
our
could mention
yeah.
one quick story that's very
Okay.
important. So also in the news, it was cut out. There's the director. So listeners, please watch him. Alexander Sokurov. He's a brilliant director, wonderful guy.
Film
So many
director.
movies, and
Yeah.
he directly criticized Putin about the censorship that's going on in Russia. And this, of course, was cut out. They cut this out of the Russian news, but you can find it on YouTube. It's very important to watch. He face to face, man to man. He did that directly to Putin's face, which we have to respect. But then Putin also he made a comment. This is what they showed in the news. He showed him telling Sokurov, no, no, no. In the Russian universities, we have to favor the children of the veterans. The children of the veterans will get the good spots in the university. And of course, This is a very controversial point in Russia. This is something.
Well, but it has been a big theme in the last couple of years, and we've written about this actually in articles that Putin is creating a new elite, and for the last couple of years in particular, this new elite is to be focused on the veterans of the special military operation in Ukraine. We need to kind of come to a close here, Chris, and we have a little section in the end we call "Dogs That Did Not Bark." You know, what things that the Russian news is not featuring. And I guess for me this week, I was struck. It's that the Russian economy and the costs of the war. You know, like kind of there's a report in the Wall Street Journal about the humanoid robot I already talked about, but there is a great new book by a friend of mine, Georgetown's Thane Gustafson, who's written a lot of great books. And this one's entitled Perfect Storm: Russia's Failed Economic Opening, the Hurricane of War and Sanctions, and the Uncertain Future. Now, that's kind of a lot in the title, but I read the book this week and it really is terrific. And what Thane documents in the book, and Thane was a co founder of Cambridge Energy Research Associates with Dan Yergin.
Yeah.
And so he has a lot of experience in the Russian energy sector and more broadly in Western investors and companies in Russia. And he brings all that to bear in this book. And the first part of the book is about the Russia's opening to the West. And then in 2014, but especially in 2022, the closing of Russia to the West and really looking at the economic opening. And it highlights the fact that, you know, the Russian economic integration that took place for several decades, 3 decades after the collapse of the Soviet Union, was actually a remarkable success and dramatically changed not only the Russian economy, but Russian society, Russian engagement, not only with the West, but around the world in really, really positive ways. And with the decision to do the full-on invasion of Ukraine, basically Putin threw all of this away. And the long-term impact this is going to have on Russians is going to be severe. It's going to be a long-term legacy of what I look at the decision to, I mean, Crimea was bad, but the full-on invasion and then the resulting sanctions and isolation of Russia from the West, it's going to take the Russia risk is going to be high for, even best case scenario, if there's a peace deal signed in 2026, these companies that went in there, it's going to take a long time for
They're not going
uh,
back.
them to for them to reamp the enthusiasm. The Russia risk is going to remain high, and it's a tragedy, really. I mean, this whole war is a tragedy. I mean, my first response again on February 24th in 2022 was with the full-on invasion that Putin was destroying two countries simultaneously, but in different ways.
Yeah.
And here we are 4 years into it, and the longer it lasts, the worse it's going to be for Russia. It's obviously terrible for Ukraine because the war is being fought on Ukrainian territory, but Ukraine is going to recover faster, a lot faster,
Yeah.
and they're going to get a lot more help. But we never hear about what's actually going on in the Russian economy. And you pointed this out before, Chris, but that really hit me this week. How about you?
That's a great book recommendation. This is a classic author, and it's great to have this. This is what we lack is this historical perspective. I would like to add, I did write my own paper. It has a little different take, a different spin, is privatization to Putinization, where I argue that it was actually the privatization that created Putin and basically making the idea of capitalism unpopular. There was no buy-in for the population. We can disagree. What we do agree on is Russia's not going back to the way it was anytime soon. I can say I'm just personally I'm scared to go there at all. I imagine I know there's many people like that. I know as many Russians they don't want to go back. It's This war has changed everything. But another topic for any researchers out there, I think a great topic would be how the experience of the 90s, the so-called chaos of the 90s, how that helped prepare everyday Russians for the war, for the sanctions, for the sanction evasions. In some ways, it seems like it gave them a kind of leg up, I would say. But
We'll have a separate discussion sometime on the 1990s because
yeah.
it really did lay the groundwork for pretty much everything that was to follow. I think you wanted to talk about about North Korea briefly, and then we better let our listeners take a break.
Well, what's not mentioned in the Russian news is, of course, Alexander Matsugura, the brilliant diplomat. He passed away last week. So this is the Russian diplomat to North Korea, and
He
this is
was
just
he was their ambassador to Pyongyang.
yes, ambassador to Pyongyang. I mean, he is just a crucial. You just can't emphasize. He's the crucial figure for this war. He's basically the man who defeated the West, who defeated my country. So I met him. He was a consul here in Busan. He was, you're talking about this, very humble, not corrupt, very fluent, absolutely fluent in Korean diplomat. And he was the first foreigner ever to actually get in one on one with the North Koreans. You could see on TV. I mean, this is a guy they liked, they trusted. He spoke their language, not just Korean, but the North Korean, the way they could understand it. I mean, he got in with them. And this was crucial for the war, of course. They just, our strategy in 2022 was they would just run out of shells. Russia would run out of shells, and then, it'd be humiliation for Putin. And that was the plan. And this, of course, did not work. The North Koreans, they're supplying more than all of the European Union combined. I mean, it's just an amazing story. And of course, it's transforming North Korea as a different place. But I would say
On
so.
the howitzer shells, yeah.
There's a lot of rumors we don't know, but he was spotted last seen in the shady restaurant in Moscow with some FSB people. And, there were there's sections people, some tough guys. We also know there were some tensions in the North Korea Russian relations. There are many right wing Russians. They wanted the North Koreans just, send 500,000 into Ukraine. That was the plan. It didn't work. And so, Matsugura, he passed away. It has not been mentioned at all on the Russian nightly news at all. He's just gone.
What about in
On
print
North
media?
Korean news, we do see Kim. He's the only one that's paid respect to him. We see him bow. It's an amazing scene. Kim Jong Un bows in the Korean way to the portrait of Matsugura, and then I can't prove it, but I believe these strange things with Lavrov, where he appears and disappears. This is connected to North Korea somehow. Every time we saw him last when he was with the North Koreans, then when there was problems, he just disappeared. And now Matsugor is gone. We've seen Lavrov reappear. I mean, can this be by chance? And then I would mention on Solovyov's talk show, we see Andrei Lugovoy, as an expert. So this is the man who
Poisoned
poisoned Litvinenko.
Alexander Litvinenko with polonium.
Yeah, so there's many Russians that feel this way. There are signs that some kind of purge could go on, or something.
We got to wrap it up.
Yes.
I want to say, first of all, thanks to Chris, of course, and thanks to our producer, Jordan Henry, with the Center for the National Interest. We will be taking a week off for Christmas. Chris will be flying out to LA. I think we will come back in 2 weeks, just in time for the new year, with our next broadcast of Russia Decoded. So thanks to all you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you later in the holidays. Bye-bye.